this National Climate Risk Assessment says these costs of climate change are going to hit before young people get their super, before young people pay off their houses. We're not talking about future generations anymore. We're talking about now. And how many 100 billion the cost is? 600's a lot. The authors actually say they think they've underestimated a lot of these costs.
One for mum, one for dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and last week the federal government finally released the first ever National Climate Risk Assessment. It paints a frightening picture of the impacts of climate change.
Cascading, compounding, concurrent. That's how the Australian Climate Service describes the impact of climate change on every community in our country.
It reinforces the fact that we need to act and act in a serious way with the transition.
Government's telling us we need to be serious about this terrible threat, and the truth is that we do. Truth is also that the answer to these issues is in the hands of the government. The biggest cause of climate change is the burning of greenhouse gases.
If they were here to put people ahead of corporate interests, they would be setting a bold target for 2035 and then using every single opportunity internationally, at COPs, at the UN, to push bigger countries to reduce their emissions.
Significant increases in heat-related deaths, acidifying oceans, making it harder for life to grow, and a possible $600 billion wiped from property values nationwide by 2050. The report was released just days before the government announced its 2035 targets and just days after the government gave the final approval to a 45-year extension of Woodside's Northwest Shelf gas export terminal, a climate-destroying project that will add around 90 million tonnes of emissions to the atmosphere annually, basically the equivalent of building 12 new coal-fired power stations. In the words of economics editor at the Sydney Morning Herald, Ross Gittins, the government is having an each-way bet. And joining me today to talk about the consequences of climate change for Australia and the new national climate targets is Australia Institute Executive Director, Dr. Richard Dennis. G'day, Richard.
Hey, Eb.
Richard, I want to start with the National Climate Risk Assessment. It's the first of its kind. I mean, there was some pretty diabolical figures in there. How important is it that we finally get to see this report?
Look, it's really important. I mean, it's staggering that it's taken not just so long to release, but so long before one of these has been written. We've been having intergenerational reports scaring us about retirement incomes in 50 years' time back when Peter Costello was Treasurer. Yet the whole time that Australia's been grappling with climate change, we've never really commissioned a report like this. So good on the government for commissioning the report. Good on them for eventually putting it out. They've been sitting on it for a while, as you said. But unfortunately, let's be clear, they've ignored the science they've just commissioned in approving new gas and coal mines. They've ignored the science they've just commissioned in setting our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So Australia's walking both sides of the street. The Australian government is walking both sides of the street, I should say. On the one hand, they're like, oh, we're better than the Liberals on climate. Look, we'll admit there's these risks. Look at this scary report. But when it comes to doing something about it, we're not acting with any urgency at all. Indeed, the whole kind of farce of talking about targets and percents is that we're kind of promising that someone in the future might do something braver than the last parliament or indeed this parliament.
So I want to ask you about specifically one of what I think most Australians would have found the most scary out of this, which is on housing. This report identified upwards of $600 billion being wiped off property values. Now, lots of Australians can't even afford a place to rent, let alone buy, but we've invested significantly in housing as an asset. What was your reaction to seeing those figures in this report?
To be clear, I'm not at all surprised. And let's put the numbers, let's put the dollars aside for now. I'll come back to the dollars. What the report that this government commission says is that 1.5 million Australians might be living in houses today that are unlivable by 2050 or 2060. 1.5 million. So here we are in Australia talking about a housing shortage. Here we are in Australia talking about how we can get granny flats in the backyards and how we can build some medium density housing a bit faster because we're worried about the supply of housing. This report just said 1.5 million might be in risk if we stay on the trajectory we're on. So put another way, all the stuff the government's doing at the moment to boost housing supply could be dwarfed by the impact of the combination of rising sea levels, bigger storms, more stormwater surges, more tidal surges. All sorts of people living in coastal areas are going to experience such regular flooding that what's a safe place to live now will be unlivable, again, according to this report commissioned by the government. Now, whether that's going to wipe out 600 billion or 600 trillion, like the numbers matter, but here we are saying, I wonder where everyone's going to live. And we've got a report saying, a lot of those places you live in, you won't be living in them.
Yeah.
Nothing, should supersede the importance of that. Yet here we are in 2025 saying to 20-year-olds, you should borrow a lot of money to do a degree because it'll help you in the long run. You should borrow a lot of money to buy a house. Or indeed, you should be worried about your super. Well, again, this National Climate Risk Assessment says these costs of climate change are going to hit before young people get their super, before young people pay off their houses. We're not talking about future generations anymore. We're talking about now. And how many 100 billion the cost is? 600's a lot. The authors actually say they think they've underestimated a lot of these costs.
A restless night is in store for Northern Rivers residents, including the town of Lismore, where heavy falls are forecast tomorrow.
They're used to floods just like in Queensland, in northern New South Wales, but the floods we're seeing in Lismore, they have not seen.
This is devastating. It's completely shocking. The power, the force that was here. It's extraordinary there wasn't a greater loss of life.
Insurance is something that I think has come really to the fore in the last couple of years, showing us that the impacts are with us here and now. And I was just curious, we always come up with these kinds of figures, 600 billion, as you said. Is the economic modelling at the heart of this and the numbers that it generates, how much should people be paying attention to it and how much is it just kind of a ballpark and we don't really know?
Look, great question. Look, what an economist would say, the orders of magnitude are right. Is it 500 billion? Is it 800 billion? It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And I think we shouldn't kind of get too caught up in how accurate that number is. What we should get caught up in is what's behind that. And the dwellings that 1.5 million people living in becoming unlivable, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
That's not a little problem. That's a huge problem. There's only 25 million people in Australia. And we've just said the houses of 1.5 million Australians might be at risk. So, yeah, the debate, as you'd expect in Australia, went very quickly to decimal places and percents. But let's keep our eye on the main game. According to the science, as Australia continues to export more and more coal, as the world burns that coal, it doesn't matter where in the world our coal and gas gets burned, it heats the one atmosphere we've got. So we're going to keep exporting coal, we're going to keep exporting gas, people are going to burn it and heat our planet, and the sea levels are going to continue to rise. They're already rising. Storms are going to continue to increase in frequency and severity. And whether that wipes out the dwellings of 1.5 million people or 1.7 or 1.2, these factors, these pressures, these risks dwarf most of the problems that our parliament's thinking about today. The insurance that you raised, I think, is a really important issue because a lot of people think, I guess we'll have to spend more on insurance. And unfortunately, I don't think most people really understand insurance. So can I explain insurance first?
Please.
Okay, for all the Simpsons fans out there, you'll know Ned Flanders didn't insure his house because insurance is a bet. Insurance is gambling. When you insure your car, you're betting you're going to crash it.
Yep.
when the insurance company takes your premium, they're betting you won't. But at the end of the year, not many people go, wasted my money, lost my bet, didn't crash my car. So most of us are willing to kind of pay an insurance premium, betting that something bad will happen in the hope that nothing bad happens. So if you pay $1,000 or $2,000 to insure your car and your car doesn't get written off, you're happy and your insurance company's happy. That's why insurance exists. But here's the trick. Insurance companies will not and never will insure against likely events. The only reason the insurance company will insure your car is they don't think you'll crash it. And because they're insuring 1 million people, if they have to pay out 50,000 times, they're still in front.
Yeah.
But if 100,000 people were going to crash their car into a wall, an insurance company insured 100,000 people, they'd be broke tomorrow. So as soon as something becomes likely, as soon as something becomes a high probability event, the insurance company just says, I can't insure against that. That's why young people can't hire cars, right? No rental car company is going to give a rental car to an 18-year-old, right? It's just too high risk. And what I think Australians are struggling to understand is what sea level rise and rising storm threat means is there'll be whole parts of Australia that insurance companies will say, I can't insure your house. Sorry, it's not about the premium, right? If I have to pay you $200,000 if there's a storm, and I think every 3 or 4 years I'm going to have to pay you $200,000, I'm just not going to insure you. Now, what happens is when whole communities become uninsurable, then whole communities become unmortgageable because a bank won't lend you money
if
to
you can't
buy
insure
a
your
house.
house. Yeah.
Indeed, every insurance contract in Australia says you have to have insurance. Sorry, every mortgage contract in Australia says you have to have insurance because the bank doesn't want to take a risk that the house the bank owns until you pay it off burns down or gets destroyed in a flood. So unfortunately, the insurance industry can't help. This isn't about greedy insurance companies ripping us off. They do that sometimes. But insurance companies don't insure race car drivers against crashing their car on a racetrack because the chances of the car crashing are just too high. Well, they're not going to insure suburbs against flood when they know that suburb's going to flood. And if you can't get insurance, you won't be able to get a mortgage. And that's one of the reasons the houses are going to collapse in value is that no one's going to be able to get a mortgage to buy them.
Mm. So has the government in any meaningful way grappled with the implications of that either, does the government, will they have to step in at that point if people can't get insurance?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. A lot of people say, if the insurance companies won't do it, the government should set up an insurance company. But remember what I just said, it's not insurance.
Mm.
So if the government's going to step in, it's going to be a kind of disaster grants type step in.
Yeah.
Now, what's that going to look like? Anyone's house gets destroyed, we'll pay you the full price to rebuild it. That's not how we treated the people who lost their house in the fires.
Yeah.
That's not how we've helped the people in Lismore today.
Mm.
Right. So there are already parts of Australia that have been destroyed by, catastrophic. We don't, as a rule, step in. Are we really going to go to the 1.5 million people who lost their houses and say, here, have $500,000, get yourself a new house?
Yeah.
Are we going to give $2 million to the people who had the nicest house and $200,000? This is an insurance we're talking about.
Yeah.
So as a nation state, as a society, I hope we think, well, how can we rally together here? How are we going to help people? But it's not going to be through insurance. The insurance industry will walk away at some point and just say those risks are too risky, can't help you there. And when the government steps in, we're either going to help the first victims and then get tired of helping, or we're going to have to just come up with some welfare type scheme that helps all sorts of affected people. But again, this is what we need to be grappling with today. But instead, we're subsidising the fossil fuel industry, giving gas away for free and telling everyone everything will be fine.
Yeah. I guess it strikes me that 2050 might feel like a long way off, but is it really? I mean, thinking about this, it's actually, there's some impacts with us here soon, and this says actually.
Yeah. So I'm an old man, Eb. I'm 55 now, and I moved to Canberra in the year 2000. So I've been here 25 years. So what we're talking about is catastrophic impacts in Australia in 25 years' time, which for me doesn't feel like long at all, because that's how long since I moved to Canberra.
Yeah.
I remember the first house. I remember the car I was driving when I got here. I remember some of the promises I made to myself about exercise and all sorts of things that I'm still hoping to live up
at
to.
6 o'clock every day.
Exactly, right? So I've got things on my to-do list that are 25 years old. And unfortunately, I think so much about climate politics is quite broken in Australia. But for decades, the idea of we have to act for future generations has been a great excuse to do
not
nothing.
do anything right now.
So as a 55-year-old, we're talking about the world I'll inhabit if I'm lucky enough to make it at 80. But for a 20-year-old listening to this, we're talking about the world they'll inhabit at 45. So, yeah, you can see why young people are far more concerned about climate change than 60-year-olds in Parliament. And you can see why young people are voting differently. And you can see why young people are angry, because here they are getting told, hey, borrow a lot of money to get a degree, borrow a lot of money to get a house. Oh, by the way, before you retire, check out the catastrophes you're going to inherit.
Yeah.
But the way that the media deals with climate is it's an environment story and it's a future story.
Yeah.
Whereas this is a housing story, a cost of living story, an inequality story, a role of government story. Even though we've been talking about it for decades, I don't think most parliamentarians get that. I don't think most people in the media get that. And I think it's only dawning on a whole bunch of people that this is not about helping your grandkids. If you're 55 or younger, this is you.
Australia's 2035 emissions target be 62 to 70%. This is a responsible target. A target's got to be two things, ambitious and achievable. A target over 70 is not achievable. It's not. It's the right target to protect our environment, to protect and advance our economy and jobs, and to ensure that we act in our national interest and in the interest of this and future generations.
The government released this report just before it announced its 2035 targets. But as you observed, they're not really, the target that they've set is supposed to be ambitious and achievable, but doesn't really relate to it's not really related to the actual climate science, is it?
No. And again, to be clear, choosing my words carefully, if we were taking the science seriously, if we were accepting climate science, we wouldn't still be approving new gas and coal. If we were accepting the science of climate change, we'd be setting domestic emission reduction targets in line with the 1.5 degrees promise that we made the world back in 2015. We're not doing either of those. We've come up with, meaningless words like ambitious but achievable. And great, I guess that fills the words on a press release. But, if a doctor told you, you better stop smoking, you better stop drinking, and you better start doing a lot of exercise or you're going to have your third heart attack, and you kept smoking, you kept drinking and said, oh, but I've started to walk a bit in the morning, you're not accepting the medical advice, and going for a walk is better than nothing. But if the doctor's told you what you need to do to avoid untimely death and you've ignored the advice, that's a conscious decision.
Yeah.
In setting these targets, in approving new coal and gas, we are ignoring the scientific advice. It's a democracy. We can be as nasty and short-sighted as we want, but there's the fact that the Liberals might be worse doesn't mean these targets are based on science.
I guess I'll go then to the North West Shelf approval, because that was really stark, flies in the face of setting any targets. It's the total opposite of what you'd be doing if you'd read that climate risk assessment report that the government's been sitting on. And it's really, at this point, it's a pattern of behaviour. So I wonder if you can lay out for people, what are the things that the government is doing that are making climate change worse as opposed to what it's saying about what it will do to make it better?
Yeah, well, the timing for the climate risk assessment was cute. The timing for the North West Shelf approval was cute. They did it straight after the election for a reason. They didn't want to do it straight before the election. Labor only just hung on to Fremantle. They only just hung on to Bean in the ACT. They only just won Melbourne. I think anyone anyone who looked at it would agree if they'd have made this North West Shelf approval before the election, I think we would have seen some quite different results. So it wasn't an accident that they waited till just after the election to do that. And it wasn't an accident that they've ignored the climate risk assessment. But yeah, to give people a sense of how far we are from listening to the science or listening to the economics, here we are in 2025 still approving new gas and coal projects. Here we are in 2025 still subsidising government-funded exploration for deposits of gas and coal that haven't even been found yet. Right, we're still looking. There might be more gas out there in them there hills, and we're out there spending taxpayers' money looking for it. Why? The science says if we found it, we shouldn't use it, but we're still subsidising the search. Straight after the 2022 election, the Albanese government gave $1.5 billion in a new subsidy for the Middle Arm gas processing hub in Darwin. Straight after the 2022 election, quick, let's subsidise $1.5 billion cash for a new fossil fuel project. We're still spending $14 billion a year on fossil fuel subsidies. We're still not even pretending to talk about things like putting a price on pollution. Right, so economics 101, tax things you want less of, subsidise things you want more of. Well, forget what the government says. We're subsidising fossil fuel expansion and we won't even tax it. But we are talking about putting a new tax on electric vehicles.
Can't have more of those.
It's them that's doing it. So, yeah, look, unfortunately, again, it's a democracy. The Albanese government won. They're constitutionally empowered to do all the things they're doing. There's no constitutional obligation to pay attention to climate science. There's no constitutional obligation to pay attention to economics. And in the design of our energy policy, our transport policy, our mining policy, we're ignoring climate science and economics.
Well, Richard, I think you're being unfair because the Environment Minister, Murray Watt, said that the approval specifically for the North West Shelf extension is based on very strict conditions, including that the project must reach net zero by 2050. Are you not comforted by those conditions?
I think we should have stricter conditions. I think we should tell the methane not to cause climate change. I think we should put conditions on the methane. Look, I think this just sort of shows how silly the Australian political debate about climate and environment is. The reality is that according to the International Energy Agency, according to the UN FCCC, according to the UN Secretary General, a world that has any chance of hanging on to only 1.5 degrees of global warming needs no new gas and coal. And to be clear, Murray Watt says that science is wrong. Murray Watt says the UN Secretary General is wrong. Now, someone's wrong, right? But to be clear, the Australian government is denying what the UN Secretary General is saying, is denying what the UN FCCC is saying, and gets away with it because it's kind of a free country. But yeah, they can put whatever conditions they want on anything. The science says, don't be doing that. That's going to make climate change worse. We reject that in Australia.
Yeah.
Our government rejects that in Australia.
Ross Gittins wrote in his column that the government is trying to have a bet each way. What did he mean by that?
Well, the government wants to tell people who care a bit about climate change that they're doing something, to tell people that care a little bit about politics that they're doing more than the Liberals. So, step in the right direction. Don't vote for those other people, while avoiding a fight with the fossil fuel industry. And, that's the problem. Imagine if we tried to ban asbestos without making the asbestos industry sad. Imagine if we tried to ban whaling without making the whaling industry sad. Well, here's Australia trying to tackle climate change without making the gas and coal industry sad. So how do you do that? Well, you pretend. You tell the public, I'm going to put some strict conditions on the gas industry while letting the gas industry open up enormous new projects. And, again, we give them half the gas they're exporting for free, and we're subsidising their new processing plants. We really want to make the gas industry happy. The government's just doing as little as it can to show voters that they're doing something about climate change.
Yeah.
But they're not doing it. They're not taking doctors' advice. They're not taking scientists' advice. They're not taking economists' advice. They're just looking for the least they can do.
And practically approving new projects like that, new fossil fuel projects that pretty much all they do is pollute. That's a pollution project.
Yeah.
That's all it does. What is the implications for the rest of the economy in meeting our climate targets, even if they're not aligned with the science?
Yeah.
What does that mean for everyone else if we keep approving new fossil fuel projects?
Oh, look, helping the gas and coal industry to expand makes life harder for the manufacturing industry, makes life harder for every other part of the economy. So what most Australians probably don't realise is that nearly 20% of all of Australia's domestic emissions, all of the emissions that count according to the domestic accounting framework, nearly 20% of all of our emissions come from the mining and production of gas and coal. It's a huge polluter domestically. Now, of course, then we export the coal and gas and burn it, and it does even more pollution. But even here in Australia, when we drill for gas, lots of it leaks. When we refine gas to put it on those big boats with the bubbles on it, it takes lots of energy to do that. So to extract new coal and gas requires lots of domestic pollution. And if we set an Australian target for pollution reduction, every time we let a new gas project get approved, we're saying to the manufacturing industry, you're going to have to pollute less. We're saying to the transport industry, you're going to have to pollute less. We're saying to the agriculture industry, you're going to have to pollute less. So, bizarrely in Australia, we simultaneously say we're setting an ambitious but achievable target while approving new projects that just made it a lot harder to meet that target.
Yeah.
So either we won't meet the target or we're making other industries work a lot harder and cut emissions a lot faster.
So when it comes to our actual emissions reduction, I know in the past, basically there's been a lot of kind of accounting tricks, creative accounting, you might say.
We're very good at it.
Are we still doing that?
Oh, God, yeah. So, look, Australia is unique for lots of reasons. We're one of the world's largest exporters of fossil fuels, and the way the climate accounts are put together, the gas and coal we export doesn't count on our books. All right, put that aside. We're unique for another reason in that we've got a continent about the size of North America with a population about the size of Singapore. There aren't many countries that look like that. So, according to the accounting rules, if trees grow, then that's a reduction in emissions.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. That's true. But what it means is that unlike virtually any other country in the world, when a drought breaks and it rains a bit and the trees grow fast, our emissions fall a bit. And governments are like, look at us reducing emissions. It's like, it rained, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the emissions have fallen. Yeah, because it rained, mate. Yeah, but they still fell. Okay, but what happens when the drought comes?
Or a bushfire.
So here's the trick. Australia isn't, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, isn't decarbonising our economy. Our actual emissions from burning fossil fuels and making electricity and driving cars around, if you think of all the use of energy and the use of fossil fuels, our emissions are barely reducing at all. Other countries' emissions are falling really fast. Ours aren't, right? We're not decarbonising the economy, in part because we keep opening new gas and coal mines that put out lots of gas, in part because our roads are now full of enormous, twin cab utes. It's obvious that Australia isn't doing everything we can to reduce emissions, but because accounting tricks, particularly in the land sector, mean that at times, it rains and trees grow. We're like, oh, bank that's on me. But that's not policy that's pushing down emissions. And more importantly, those emission reductions aren't permanent. Like if you, as Norway does, switch its whole fleet of vehicles virtually from petrol to electric, those emissions stay low. But if we have a few good years of rain and the trees grow, we're like, yay, look at us decarbonising the economy. No, mate. That's not what you're doing.
Yeah.
And as you said, bushfire comes along, drought comes along, and we haven't actually done the work. So after decades of talking about it, we still haven't done the simple stuff.
And presumably that just means actually that when those things happen, droughts or bushfires, we've actually not reduced emissions at all.
Exactly. And to be clear, when you look at Australia's emissions excluding acronym alert LULUCF, land use change and forestry, when you look at Australia's emissions excluding that, then our emissions have barely fallen. So put another way, the main reason Australia is saying we've reduced emissions since 2005 has got to do with trees and land. Now, sure, the accounting rules allow the government to take credit for that, but when Europe says it's reducing emissions, it's because it's reducing emissions.
Yeah.
Even America is doing a better job of reducing actual emissions than us. But again, because we've got a continent.
We've got fuel standards,
energy
efficiency in buildings.
And states like California, which are huge economies in their own right, have got emissions trading schemes, all sorts of things. So unfortunately in Australia, we're much better at playing accounting games than we are at decarbonising. And if you don't believe me, just next time you're on the road, look around. We haven't even started to try.
Yeah.
How would you feel if a country that is meant to help, to protect, is the one slowly destroying you little by little?
I know we get development assistance to build our climate resilience. Isn't it funny that we're getting that assistance, but at the same time, you're doing the very thing that is destroying our homes? So maybe we are so stupid as not to see this.
We did see in the last couple of weeks the government try and fail to land a couple of security agreements with the Pacific. And we know for the Pacific, security really is tied to the impacts of climate change. Do you think there's any links to be seen there?
Oh, yeah. Look, I think Australia is really messing things up in the Pacific. The Pacific keep asking us very clearly, very politely to stop approving new gas and coal. To say we are dismissive of that doesn't come close. We are hostile. We are completely ignoring the primary request of our nearest neighbours, allegedly our closest friends. So step one, we're ignoring what they're asking of us. Step two, we're asking them to kind of commit to us in a very binary, be on our side, not China's side, at a time where Australia is not really being a very good neighbour. And of course, within the Pacific, there's all sorts of tensions and problems of their own, including the ones caused by the storms, caused by the climate change we're talking about. So unfortunately, I think Australia is behaving quite badly in its own domestic backyard. It's bullying its way to certain outcomes, but we're not making friends. We are not strengthening our alliances. And indeed, I think in the long run, we're going to reap a bitter harvest. And I think the fact that Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu are backing away from some of the demands Australia's placing on them shows just how hard it's getting for the Pacific to want to look like they're Australia's close friends.
What would it look like if Australia was taking the climate seriously?
We'll know Australia is taking climate change seriously when it stops approving new gas and coal projects, when it no longer is planning for a future where the world buys more fossil fuels off us, not less. So until we stop expanding our fossil fuel production, we're clearly pretending. While we're still subsidising the use of fossil fuels, we're clearly pretending. And indeed, until we start to see that tackling climate change isn't an abstract thing, but requires a transport policy that gets emissions down off the roads, a housing policy that gets emissions down in our houses, an industry policy that stops subsidising the polluting industry and helps the industries that are decarbonising. Until we get serious about those specific things, as long as we're stuck playing what I call the game of percents, just promising to do things in the future rather than committing to do things now, then it's all talk, no action.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Eb.
If you want to read more from Richard, you can order Dead Centre, How Political Pragmatism is Killing Us from Australia Institute Press. It's out now for just $19.95 or become an annual subscriber to the Vantage Point series and save $15 a year. You can find out more at australiainstitute.org.au/store or tap the link in the show notes. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 23rd of September. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.